victory. Now I have to put my glasses on. I always like this picture. Miss Reddy said, "That's South Beach, that's not Doral." I said, "I know, but it's a cool picture with cool cars." That's the entire reason behind it. You know, it really is a shame, too. It's part of the process of due diligence. If you're going to have a sports car, why do you have a white sports car? I mean, no one can see a white sports car. It should be yellow, it should be red, it should be purple with flames. It's like a guy who feels guilty, so he'll have a sports car, but it won't be too short. Right, really, what we're going to try to do, and that's a terrible slide, is I really want to talk about intermeshing disciplines. I think due diligence is probably the most overused word in the financial lexicon with very little form. Have you done your due diligence? Yeah, I've done my due diligence. What type? Well, I have my accountant. He did. Okay. You have a lawyer look at it? So I need the shield to look at it too. Yeah, you need a lawyer to look at it. Now, what about someone who's a subject matter expert in the restaurant business? Oh, really? I need to have someone who knows that? Yeah. But it goes beyond that. It goes to the thinking process that we as humans need to adapt. And really, it's about never being lied to again and accepting the lie. We'll always get lied to. I mean, that's part of, what is enchantment? Enchantment is a deception that's pleasurable. You know, what is fraud? Fraud is a deception that really wasn't pleasurable at all. So what is due diligence? Fox or the hound? Which one are you? The problem is, you may not know which one you are, and when it's finally revealed, it might be a surprise to both. It's really about making an informed choice and asking the questions to make sure you get informed. Old Ronald Reagan used to say, trust but verify. A list of tasks before investing. Kind of. Choices to invest based upon four-color glossy brochures with unremitting suspicion. I always like unremitting suspicion, and I do not like four-color glossy brochures. Integrity management. Really? You either have integrity or you don't. How do you manage it? It's like car management. You either have a car or you don't. General measure of prudence, activity, astuity in business, investing, negotiating, and other processes. That was written by an attorney. I can guarantee that. Know your customer process. Public liability. Model due diligence audits. Why do you need to do due diligence on a model? And since each business is unique, does a checklist work for each business? No. That's one of the problems with due diligence definitions. What is due diligence? Audits. Audits by CPA firms, they are not a substitute for due diligence. Audits do not find frauds, and that's okay. Audits are not designed to find frauds. That's our expectation on audits. That's incorrect. And in fact, a fascinating fellow, certified internal auditor, Mohammed Massoud, presented at the Arab CPA conference in Ramallah about a year and a half ago, the expectation gap of audits. That it is our expectation gap that audits find frauds and should always find frauds. And it was really a lot of fun to see the arguing back and forth in English and Arabic. It was hysterical. I loved it. Due diligence is the independent fact-finding process involved in any important decision. This isn't just about business. It has been described as the mission to find out who is the fox and the rabbit, or the fox and the hound, a surprise to both. It's about asking and seeking answers to the questions. It is very valuable in due diligence as the creation of a series of hypotheses and testing the hypotheses. If n times n equals 4, what is n? That's the only answer? If n times n is 4, what is n and m? It also could be minus 2.
1 and 4.
Yeah. It's,
1 and 4.
we jump, and that's exactly about thinking fast and slow. It's exactly about what we do in thinking fast and slow. It's not a pass or fail. It's not a right or wrong. It's an investigation of claims made and implied. What's an expressed claim? How about, I graduated from Annapolis. That's an express claim. That's something I've told you I've done. Now, I've never even been to Annapolis. But in a meeting with a gentleman 15 years ago, I like telling this story because it makes me look smart and clever. Writing my first edition of my due diligence book, my old boss, Jim Hergenruder, and I were sitting at a table and we're talking with a fella, and he had come highly recommended by some very powerful men in Phoenix. And he's talking about his days in Annapolis. And there's some people you gain an immediate dislike for. And he managed to get it with me. Finally, I was tired of listening. This will tell you how long ago it was. I had 3-ring binders with the drafts of my book, and I went through it, and it had the number for Annapolis. So I went to some of you young people that may not know what this is, but you can look it up in a museum, a phone booth. And I put some quarters in it and called Annapolis and said, has this fellow ever, I'm thinking he graduated 41, 42. Mr. Files, he is not graduated from Annapolis. Would you check yours either side? Mr. Files, I am checking from the day all military college opened till today. Okay, sorry. So I get back and I'm looking at him. I knew I disliked him, now I hate him. And then those little bad angels pop up. Hey, Mark, order expensive brandy, then ditch him. Okay. So, you know what, I think, Jim, we should move forward with this. Let's have some brandy. Got some expensive brandy. Then I started, not until I finished my brandy. I started picking a fight with Jim. I said, you know what, I've about had it with you. Let's take it outside. This is my boss. He goes outside, he goes, what is wrong with you? I said, Jim, I called Annapolis. He's never been to Annapolis. He's lied. He said, why did we pick a fight? I said, he goes, why did you order the brandy? Did you like the brandy? He goes, yeah. He goes, why did you pick a fight? So we can leave and stiff him with the bill. Jim goes, oh, good. I'm a bad man, but fun. Implied claims. Someone you hire that's coming to work for your firm has the ability to do the work. He says he can do the work. That's an express claim. But he's leaving another firm. Does he have an anti-compete clause? Is there a period of time when he cannot work for another company in the same industry? Someone's selling a patent. It's implied that the patent is valid. What if they haven't paid their patent maintenance fees? It's now public domain. Third-party interference in those claims. There can be all sorts of third-party interference. There's I'll use his name, Roger Bay. He has a master's in physics and a master's in mathematics, in particular differential equations. He cannot relate to any human being. And when I first met him, he was working on flat plate satellite receivers and flat RF receivers. Have any of you have a TV that now has that little flat antenna? That's Roger's work. And when I went to look at a business, for some reason Roger looked at me and he goes, "You're the due diligence guy." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Run. Make sure your investors never put a dime in." Okay. Can we meet later for coffee? No. What about it? No. And I thought for a while, what is the problem? Roger was on probation. he had worked with another company where he was the scientist, but they put him up to sign papers. The gentleman who ran the company stole the money, but Roger is the one who signed the papers. After his probation was over and this company collapsed, I've been working with Roger and his wife Mary now for 20 years. He's a lot of fun. But there was a third-party interference, his probation. I could not work with him because of his probation. But what other third-party claims do you think would interfere with the contract? How about a competing patent? How about a patent that's competing? What about, you're about to open a restaurant, and you don't realize that the building is going to be shortly acquired by the city and everyone's thrown out under eminent domain. And you've just plowed $150,000, $250,000, $1 million worth of tenant improvements. I haven't seen it all, but I've seen a lot. In legal due diligence, the stuff for the attorneys, you need the foundation documents, those documents that go into the founding of the company, corporation documents, bylaws, minutes. And I can tell you in most entrepreneurial companies, they have the incorporation documents. Sometimes they even have bylaws. Now, have they gone by these documents? Oh, heck no. Heck no, but that's okay. That's something to understand and you can remediate. A sole proprietorship. What does a sole proprietorship as a foundation document? Nothing. Nothing. And that's okay. A general partnership, typically they'll have a partnership agreement and minutes of meeting. They'll also have their tax returns and the accounting, and that's a good start. They may also have informal agreements. What would be an informal agreement between two general partners? An example.
Salary.
Salary?
Their salary.
Yeah, but that's going to be documented, but that isn't that would often be an informal agreement with partners. We know that.
Sure.
Operating agreement? An operating agreement?
That would be documented. I'm thinking more the way we as humans work.
Yes, they assume that they own 50-50 and one.
Yeah, they assume they own 50-50. And you know, really?
All I'm sharing?
You know, I don't want to pay taxes. You want to pay taxes? All right, so here's what we agree to do. Every year, right now, we're doing pretty good. So you got 20 grand, I got 20 grand. We figure out how to take vacations, and we call it business research, okay? Okay. You'll see those types of things in a general partnership, where they look at one another and say, we don't want to pay taxes, so we can do something over here. A limited partnership, you're going to have the partnership agreements. You'll have the general and the limited partner. You won't see very many of these anymore. They've been more or less supplanted by the LLC. The determination of the general partner and minutes of the meetings. Barry Zemmel, many years ago, started buying up units of master limited partnerships. He started with the Disney films, and then he went on to other films, and he would purchase enough of the limited partnership units where he could outvote the general partner. And what happened, and this was in real estate and others, what happened one time is general partner said, if you don't stop buying these units, I'm going to make you a general partner. And Barry said, no, you won't. He hung up the phone, he looked over at me, he goes, he's going to do it. Made Barry a general partner. The dumb stuffing didn't realize Barry had more votes. He fired the general partner as soon as they made him a general partner. Barry made a lot of money, bless his heart. I loved his model. A corporation's going to have articles of incorporation, bylaws, amendments, minutes, directors and shareholders. What's most important for any type of small corporation is that they actually have certificates that they've issued. Certificates that they've issued and that they've kept their corporation reasonably current with the filing requirements of the state, city, or counties in which they operate. Anyone work with IBCs, international corporations? I see the smiles. Yes, yes. An IBC is a corporation that is formed in a jurisdiction that can do, and it can do business anywhere in the world, but in that jurisdiction. Originally created by the British Virgin Islands and copied by probably 20, 25 jurisdictions now. You need to understand the domicile of the incorporation. And when you start doing business with it, you're going to need some additional work. First of all, you'll need a certificate of incumbency from the agent. Who is the persons who are in charge that have authority to bind that entity? What about a certificate of authority? And an agent-verified shareholder list. And if you're going to work with that company over a longer period of time, such as in a banking or accounting relationship, you should have a follow-up list of shareholders every year that says, this is the list of shareholders, and these are the changes from the previous year. You know how crafty people can be. It's that time of year again. You get to be the shareholder for the certificate. Done? Thank you. Now I got the shares. The problem with that smart aleck strategy is under U.S. tax law, that was a gift. He has to pay taxes on. When he gives it back to me, I have to pay taxes on. So we don't mention much about that, okay? Okay. Yeah. It's one of those informal agreements. Limited liability companies, you'll have articles of association, and you'll have to figure out whether the LLC is managed by a manager or it's managed by the members. Either is fine. The date of dissolution, their particular articles of operation, list of the members or unit holders, and you also have to find out what their tax selection was, whether they elected to be taxed as a partnership or they elected to be taxed as a corporation. And that has to be done within, what, 90 days, 30 days? 75, yeah, it's a short time period. Something new, a company limited by guarantee. There's all sorts of hybrids out there. A company limited by guarantee is where all the shareholders, this is much like a general partnership with limits. All the shareholders are required, if a capital call comes in, to put money in. And it could be each person is responsible for $50,000 or $1 million. This can be an interesting structure, especially if you want to make sure that there's overhanging liability on yourself or a partner so no one comes after you. But a company limited by guarantees really is something you need to be aware of. And if you're purchasing shares in a company limited by guarantees, you need to find out what the limits are on the calls for that capital. That has hurt a lot of people that didn't understand some of the investing in France and some other civil law countries that use a company limited by guarantees. Trusts are fascinating, have a fascinating history. It really goes back to the Templar and Hospitalier Knights. And what would happen is after the king had an heir and a spare, the other boys would go off to fight. And they had their tract of land, and while they were gone, it would be put to be managed, and it was trusted to the Templar Knights. And that the Templar Knights would take care of this land and would accrue profits from the land, partially to them for administering, partially to his family. And if he didn't return after a period of time, the land would go as he described. Well, often the land went to the Templar Knights or the Hospitalier Knights. This created a huge problem later when the Catholic Church and the French king discovered that the Templar Knights were wealthier than both of them put together. That was kind of the end of the Templar Knights. Piece of trivia. Why is Friday the 13th unlucky? That was the day that the last head of the Templar Knights, Desmoulins, was burned at the stake. That's the origin of it. Wow. It was certainly unlucky for him. You have in a trust, you have irrevocable and revocable. The grantor in a revocable trust can revoke the trust when they want. This is the way most living trusts are. Irrevocable is a trust that now creates an asset category that is exempt. So if you're looking to loan me $100,000 and I show that I've got $2 million in an irrevocable trust, how much of that money can you get? Not a dime. I look good on paper, but it's all Teflon. The grantor is the person who's throwing money into the trust or assets. The grantee would be the trust and or the beneficiaries of the trust. The trustee can be the grantor, and it could be someone else. It's a person who manages the trust in accordance with the trust agreements. If you're going to buy an asset out of a trust, you want to make sure that the trust has been run in accordance with the trust agreement. You have to get the trust agreement and take a look at the history of management. Does the trustee have the authority to sell that business, that asset? The protector, something not often used, is kind of the overseer of the trustee. If the trustee is doing something wrong, the protector can come in and whack the trustee right out. They have only one job: they can fire the trustee. Hiring a new trustee is something that can only be done in accordance with the provisions that were in the trust agreement. A foundation is a civil law copy of a common law trust. And this is important. If you have investors coming from overseas, especially from civil law jurisdictions, Panama, France, Spain, all of that civil law does not recognize a trust. You may say, you know what? We will put these assets in a trust for you. But you know what will happen if those assets are in a trust? In France, France says, what is a trust? That is English. No. And they will recognize it as a general partnership and tax it accordingly. You might have to look to have a French foundation, or even a Panamanian foundation, that owns the shares of the trust or the units of the trust. So that way you can bridge two different laws. A mutual company, you'll see some of these mostly in common law jurisdictions, where it's very much like a general partnership, but with specific limits of liability. Often they're formed for a specific purpose. A mutual company for a building society in a particular area, or a mutual company to run a hospital. Charitable companies and NGOs, the more I work with them, the more I dislike them. If you're going to work with a charity, absolutely make sure you get the IRS 990 form. If they don't have it there, it may or may not also be up on something called GuideStar, which is absolutely free. NGOs, that's kind of a catchphrase for, quote, possibly charitable. The original NGOs were a country forms a corporate entity, funds that corporate entity, and now that goes out and does good deeds. But right now, most of the good deeds I see NGOs being used for is a conduit for corruption. If you turn around and you have the same density of NGOs that exist in Palestine, and translated that density to the United States, there would be 4 NGOs in the United States for every Starbucks location. And kind of to go along with that suspicion, we're joking, we were way over caffeinated. But a couple of the guys at the Beers at the University said, Mr. Files, you know how to make a fortune in Palestine. I said, what? And he says, once you have 3 NGOs, you're set for life. I said, oh boy, I don't want to hear that. And most recently it was a Malaysian minister who said that he helped set up NGOs with the Malaysian government, had payments sent to those NGOs, and he just essentially had that money expensed so he could live a bigger life. Shock. Did I do that well? Okay. Substantive agreements. We're still in the legal due diligence. Shareholder agreements, management agreements, key employees. What is a gold collar worker?
Executive decision.
You're right. Typically, there'll be an executive, but a gold collar worker is typically a worker that is so important that if that worker or group of workers were removed, the company folds. It'd be something like if you're in software design, your lead programmers. That's a gold collar worker. Or if you're designing automobiles, your best engineers. And this is particularly important when you're doing acquisitions. Are those gold collar workers going to stay? And boy, did American Express learn about gold collar workers after they went after Shearson. By the time American Express had finished acquiring Shearson lost at least 40% of their top producers to Goldman Sachs. Oops. These are supposedly the smartest guys in the business. And it's not that they're dumb, and they're not. And I don't want it to come across that way. I've just seen more disasters than a lot of these firms combined, because that's where I am. It's an old Cajun fellow said, you know, as you go across the swamp, you know the difference between them rocks and them gators. You know, don't step on them gators. Facilities, do they own or rent? The taxes on facilities, or whether they paid or filed their taxes. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to come back to these in just a second. We were talking today about the problems with a building that you rent. If you have, I'm going to run a little long, guys, sorry. If you have a really good business and you're renting the premises, what's going to happen when that lease comes due? Landlord's going to go, it's going to cost him a lot to move. I'm going to raise the rent. So, you should always take a look, if you're going to buy some type of business that is renting, that is doing well, that you have the ability to counter the coming rent increase. Also, if you're located in a mall or strip center, and your business depends upon the anchor tenant leaves, you should have already included in your lease agreement a de-escalation or a reduction in rent if that anchor tenant moves. If you move into one of the many strip centers we have around the United States that are derelict, and your business becomes the anchor tenant, you should work out some type of agreement to get a little piece of vig of the other things that you're able to help rent out. Intellectual property and critical information. We know what intellectual property is. Copyrights, patents, trademarks. What's critical information? Any of critical information? I have a copy of your customer list. Come on, baby. We've known each other for an hour. Oh. See, he knows what critical information is. How about your marketing plan? Yeah. Critical information is that information that you do not want your competitor to have, and your protection of it is basically a threat-based system. You want to make sure that when you're buying intellectual property or critical information, that this information, that there's some process inside the company that has been aggressively used to keep this information private, and it's more than agreements. Even just things such as need to know. Does everyone in the company need to know our client list? No. Does everyone there need to know our marketing plan? No. These are some things that you need to look at. Key suppliers. A classic was a beautiful piece of technology called the counterfeit cop. You could put a bill in and it would tell you whether it was counterfeit or not, and it used a little UV bulb. And the gentleman said, you know, I've got the ability to sell 100,000 of these next year. I said, you know, I believe him. This guy was a great marketer. He had a long track record of successful products. So I started doing a little work. Well, the supplier for the bulbs was Slovenia. The bulbs were made in Poland, and the complete capacity of the plant was 60,000 bulbs a year, and the plant said, we won't sell it more than 20. Oops. If you have a key supplier is any supplier that will, if they fail, you might fail. Think about credit card processing, your landlord. What other key suppliers can you think of? And key customers are just the opposite way. In the tool industry, you either are selling to Lowe's or you're selling to Home Depot anymore. What happens if Home Depot goes bad and 80% of your sales is at Home Depot? That becomes, to me, a very fragile type of business.